So you mentioned the FDI, and one of the big narratives I see debated is the nearshoring narrative in Mexico.
Mhm.
And I've seen you post a few times about it. I know you follow Mexico. So what are your thoughts? Is that happening? Where is it happening? What type of companies? Who benefits? Curious for your thoughts.
You are totally right on mining, on lithium, on natural resources, and on energy. He's been very bad. That's kind of my assumption in general is that left wingers just don't invest in natural resources when you have a left wing government in power. And
Yeah.
so I was fortunate enough to not be involved there. But like I said, he came from my airports and they dropped very hard and then they came back very hard. It's a different story. On FDI, yeah, I mean, I think it's very clearly happening. You can look at supply chain data. For example, the Wall Street Journal ran a piece earlier this year that the number of Mexican firms that have been exporting to the US has more than doubled since the pandemic. Meanwhile, that figure's gone down sharply for China. Yeah, just the amount of new factories. I was posting them on Twitter for a while, and I figured people would be getting bored. But it was like every 2 or 3 weeks, there was some big new factory going in Monterrey. It'd be like Hershey one week, be Procter and Gamble a few weeks after that. Obviously, they got the $5 billion Tesla plant, which in turn should cause a lot of other like suppliers to Tesla to also want to build their like a steel company announced a $2 billion plant, presumably to make more steel for all the new cars they'll be making there. So you get kind of these network effects just as one or two big investors come into a region, or one or two big factories, excuse me, then you need a lot of other supply chain, like packaging. There's a lot of packaging investment in Mexico now because companies had been buying Mexican companies. Like I was talking to someone from Hershey, Mexico, and she said they just gotten overwhelmed because they bought all their packaging from China and they had like this huge demand in the US, but they just didn't have any cardboard. And so their factory shut down. And so like, okay, fine, we're only going to buy packaging from Mexico now because we can't have that happen again. Logistics has been another huge one that's been kind of the trucking industry and warehouses are huge growth sector right now. You just had an IPO for a Mexican logistics company in the US.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it makes more sense to me culturally. Like, why would the US be buying this stuff from China when they can do it in Mexico or even like Colombia, like a company like Technoglass? Like that business model made sense to me because it's clearly cheaper to manufacture the same stuff in Colombia and then instead of across the Pacific, you're in the Caribbean and it's right there. But so you think that's going to persist into 2024, 2025, the nearshoring, you think? But like the incremental investments now that they need to build up, like packaging, logistics, and stuff. That trend continues, even though maybe the factories have already started to be built.
Yeah, I think over time Mexico will expand its lead on China in terms of how
Mm.
much of US trade is with Mexico and how much is with China. That would be, if my thesis is correct, Mexico will keep growing its lead. And if I'm wrong, then you'll see China regain share against Mexico. But
That's
that would be the thing to watch. But I think Mexico can take share for quite a while.
interesting. So you just watch FDI for that? You watch the export numbers to track it?
Yeah, and then I got a Google News alert for factory for just like investments
Okay.
kind of when people are announcing new factories. That's kind of the leading indicator when a company announces a new factory. Then in like 6 months, 12 months, you'll see new jobs. You'll see people moving into those states. I think most people probably don't appreciate just the scale of the internal migration within Mexico. You've had a lot of
Mhm.
southern Mexico and a lot of Central America move to northern Mexico to get jobs. Monterrey, for example, its
Yeah.
population is great, 75,000 people a year, which is just you run those numbers. It was like 1.2 million, 1.4 million people when NAFTA was approved, and now it's like 5.5 million people. It's just,
It's crazy,
it's been
right?
an incredible run.
And they're moving there
Uh,
because there's jobs, right? Like they're moving there because it makes economic
exactly.
sense.
Yeah, they're paying on average, I believe, 450 USD per hour to their manufacturing employees, which in Mexico is a pretty good wage. Certainly, if you're someone living in the poor southern part of Mexico or in Guatemala, you look at that and say, hey, but might go up there and
Right.
build something for my family.